Last July, the people of Zimbabwe voted in a presidential election where, for the first time in nearly 4 decades, Robert Mugabe was not on the ballot. Mugabe's ouster was 1 year ago, and that era it ushered in held the promise of peace and prosperity for the people of Zimbabwe, who have suffered for far too long. I had the honor of serving as an election observer, where I bore witness to the excitement of thousands who walked for miles and waited in long lines to cast votes that mattered. I was there in a tent late at night, watching them count ballots by kerosene lamp, and it was democracy in its rawest form, and it was a pleasure to be there. But the next day, the excitement turned to horror and disappointment when 6 people were killed by the army in the streets of Harare after demonstrations turned violent. We then watched as opposition figures like Tendai Biti, who's a sitting member of the Zimbabwean parliament and certainly well known to this committee, were arrested on charges of inciting post-election violence. For all of us who've been rooting for change in Zimbabwe, especially the Zimbabweans themselves, these events were crushing. Nevertheless, calm returned, and the Constitutional Court eventually declared Emmerson Mnangagwa the winner of the election. An election result, I should add, that was consistent with reports issued by entities funded by Western governments, including our own. Since that time, President Mnangagwa has largely been saying the right things. Some of the reforms, however, have been slow to come. Zimbabwe may be open for business, as is the slogan now, but foreign direct investment has not flowed into the country, as many are still wary of the investment climate there. Zimbabwe's economy has gone from bad to worse, leaving people with no access to cash, facing acute shortages of consumer goods and fuel, and opposition figures and their families continue to be harassed at times. And the fate of those, including Tendai Biti, who were arrested in the wake of post-election violence, remains unclear. But there are signs of promise. The budget put forward by the government in October is very encouraging. President Mnangagwa has pledged to push Parliament to repeal 2 controversial measures passed by the Mugabe regime that directly contradict Zimbabwe's constitution. And for the first time in decades, democratic space is being opened in Zimbabwe. And the corrupt shakedowns that Zimbabweans faced on a daily basis for years under the Mugabe era have been a thing of the past since his ouster. The purpose of today's hearing is to get a better understanding of the course Zimbabwe is on, so that in the months ahead, Congress can evaluate U.S. policy options and play a constructive role. I've long wished to see Zimbabwe prosper in a manner that its people deserve. What happened in the country since I lived there in 1983 is nothing short of a tragedy. That's why I, along with Senator Coons, introduced the Zimbabwe Democracy and Recovery Amendment Act earlier this year, and the bill, which was signed into law this summer, reinforces the markers that the new government needs to meet in order to forge a better bilateral relationship with the United States. But it also signals that the U.S. does, in fact, want to have a constructive bilateral relationship with Zimbabwe. I hope to get a better sense today from our witnesses of whether the new government in Zimbabwe is prepared for that as well. Let me just say in closing, what a privilege it's been for me to work and be involved with Zimbabwe. As most of this committee knows, I spent time in Zimbabwe 35 years ago as a Mormon missionary. And several years ago, I was able to reconnect with friends there whom I hadn't seen since the early 80s, including one of my missionary companions there, Peter Chaya, who, despite a severe disability brought on by polio as a child, has managed to raise 4 children and contribute a great deal to his country. I think of friends like Peter Chaya and know that they deserve much more than they've gotten. They deserve a government that represents them, one that will allow them to follow their dreams and realize the dreams of their children. And it's my hope that we in the U.S. Congress can play a constructive role in making that happen. So to my colleagues, I say, as I say in Zimbabwe, Tatenda. Thank you. Thank you for indulging my interests and allowing me to be involved in a continent and in a country and with a people that I love so dearly.